I would like to tell you a story about growing up in a mining camp in the mountains of East Tennessee. When I think back, I can't remember paint being on the houses. And when I visualize the houses, everything looks gray. And of course, all the houses were heated by coal. And it being a coal mining camp, coal was abundant. And I can't ever remember my family purchasing any coal. There was a railroad track that ran behind our house, and when the steam engine would come in on the side track, it was a side track, to pick up the coal cars, when they would bump them together, I don't know if they did it purposely, but coal would fall from the cars, and you could go out your back door and get all the coal to burn that you needed. I don't think the houses were insulated because each room had what they called a grate. We didn't burn wood in it, we burned coal. And in the wintertime, I can still see my mother and some of my family and even myself standing around the grate, and you would warm your back and the front would freeze, and then you'd turn around and warm the front and the back would freeze. The houses were cold. And I can remember if you were in a bed and you had a lot of cover on top of you, you would still get cold because all the coal came from the bottom of the bed, so you had to have as much covers on the bottom of the bed as you did the top of the bed. And there was a creek that ran in front of our house, and in the summertime when we would have thunderstorms up in the mountain, that creek would get out of its banks. And I can remember, I must have been 5 or 6 years old, and I can remember standing on the porch watching the river rage. And of course, at that time, people had outhouses on the side of the creek, and they all dumped their garbage in the creek. And when we had a flood, you could see it would just clean everything out. And you could see everything floating down the creek. Well, years ago, after I had been away from there since I was a child, I went back up there to look around. And the town that I was born in, or the mining camp, no longer exists. There's not one single solitary house remaining in that community. Someone had put a trailer there. But the thing that really surprised me when I looked at that river that I used to watch from the front porch of my house, and I still can't figure out, it's so vivid in my mind, watching those limbs from trees and all the garbage from the side of the creek flowing down the creek from my vantage point from my left to my right. But the creek really didn't flow in that direction. That's how your perspective can get off. And I can remember my dad would go to a mining camp up the road to get gasoline. And I had a little tricycle, and one day I decided that I was going to go up to that mining camp and get some gasoline for my tricycle. To get there, I had to go across a railroad track that was on the main road that went up on a main part of the I'm wanting to say a mountain, but that too, when I went back there after I had gotten older, the mountain wasn't really as high as I thought it was. But anyway, I got to the top of this hill with my tricycle, and I heard my mother down on the road in the mining camp hollering at me, and I knew that I was in trouble. So I came off of that hill on my tricycle, and just as I went across the railroad track, a train came through. I can't even imagine going through something like that with one of my grandchildren or one of my children. You know, times just change, and you think back on some of the things you did, and it's amazing that you survived. But a mining camp was a unique place to grow up. Things that you take for granted, we didn't have. I know on Saturday night, I can remember seeing all the people walking up the railroad track, gathering in certain areas. And for some reason, there was always a coal car parked near our house on the sidetrack, and it was always full of sand. And some of us kids would climb up in that coal car and play in the sand. And there was a lot of interaction among people, a lot of fights. But that's back when, you didn't really have to worry about somebody coming up behind you back then. If someone had a disagreement with you, they would always confront you face to face. And I'll tell you one thing that happened. Of course, it was a joke, but I didn't know that it was a joke. We lived near the commissary, and I was in the commissary one day, and this guy came in, and another guy came in behind him, and he had a shotgun. And he grabbed him on the shoulder, and he said, "Where do you want to get shot, in the feet or the head?" And the guy said, "Well, I'll guess you'll just have to shoot me in the head." And I was standing right by these two guys. And so he grabbed him and drug him out of the commissary. And he pointed his shotgun up in the air and fired it. And they just hee-hawed. And I mean, I was as white as a sheet and shaking, because I thought I was going to witness something terrible. But there was always things like that going on in the mining camp. I can remember my mother. I mean, she was a person that you did not mess with. And she had a big iron shovel that she used to shovel coal into the grate. And that thing must have weighed 25 pounds. And she used it as a weapon if anybody was trying to break in the house or anything like that. And I saw her rather, take that shovel and get it in her hands, and she was ready to make war on anybody that tried to come into our house. But it was a unique time in our country, and I was born in 1938. And I was 6 or 7 years old when we moved away from that mining camp, because my dad went to work at Oak Ridge during the Second World War. My dad was a World War I veteran. He was born in 1893. I think I do have a video out there about my dad. So anyway, I feel fortunate that I lived during that era, although there were some times that were traumatic. But it was an unusual time in our country, but in some ways it was a pleasant time. People had a lot of fun. Conversation was the number one priority among people when they came to your house, and children could really get an education. I can remember certain people. My dad was a good conversationalist, and of course he knew other men who were good storytellers, and they would come and sit on our front porch, and us children knew not to interrupt the adults. And I would sit there for hours and listen to these people talk and tell stories, and it was as enjoyable as anything that I've seen on television today. But I was just sitting here thinking this morning about the town that I was born in no longer exists. There was a coal tipple there for a while, but that's not even there. And they even pulled the railroad out. Kind of reminds you of that tune by John Prine that I have on one of my videos, Muhlenberg County. And surprisingly, the way things go and people you meet, a friend of mine was the corporate pilot for the man who was, I don't know if he was the owner or the president of Peabody Coal Company for a while. Well, that's just some ramblings from me. Long, but if you didn't enjoy it, you've already gone. But thank you very much if you stayed around. Have a good day. We'll see you. Bye-bye.